At 39 years old, Bryson Jenkins made $58,000 a year as an auto body technician, a salary that felt like trying to fill a swimming pool with a teaspoon in the sticky, expensive air of Jacksonville, Florida. He was a good man, a simple man, whose hands were permanently stained with the grease and paint of other people's repaired lives. Now he sat in the suffocating silence of his late father's house on Archer Road, the air thick with the scent of stale pipe tobacco and lemon pledge. The funeral had been that morning, a quiet affair under a sky the color of a bruised plum. Rain threatened but never fell, a perfect metaphor for the grief lodged in his throat. His wife Tamia sat beside him on the worn floral sofa, a $300 affair his father had cherished for 20 years. She was performing a perfect pantomime of sorrow, her hand resting on his knee, her sighs timed with theatrical precision. But her eyes kept darting to her phone, a brand new $1,200 iPhone, its screen glowing with a life that felt alien in this house of memories. Bryson was drowning. He was drowning in the loss of his father, Robert. The quiet, steady man who had taught him how to read a wiring diagram and how to be decent in a world that often wasn't. He was drowning in the quiet hum of the window unit air conditioner, a sound that had been the soundtrack to every summer visit of his life, and he was drowning in debt, a slow rising tide of credit card balances and a car payment that felt heavier each month. His 2012 Toyota Camry, with 187,000 miles on the odometer, was reliable, but it was a constant reminder of their financial reality. Tamia called it a beater. She, on the other hand, drove a gleaming white BMW 3 Series, a $43,000 machine she'd acquired 2 years ago. It was, she'd explained, an essential business expense, an investment in their image. Right now, that investment was parked outside his father's humble, paid-off, $140,000 house, looking like a spaceship that had landed in the wrong world. The contrast was a physical ache in Bryson's chest. What had his father's life of careful saving and quiet dignity amounted to? A worn-out sofa, a humming window unit, and a son who couldn't afford to fix the leaky roof over his own head. He had no idea how wrong he was. Have you ever felt like you were working as hard as you could, but still falling further behind? It's a feeling that can grind you down to nothing. Let us know in the comments if you've ever been there, and keep watching to see how a simple, forgotten piece of paper can change everything. The facade of their life had been built 5 years earlier, constructed on a foundation of what Bryson believed was pure, unadulterated love. It was a Tuesday evening in their small Northside duplex, the rent a steep $1,400 a month. Bryson had just gotten home from a 10-hour shift at the garage, his muscles screaming, the smell of primer clinging to his skin. Tamia met him at the door, her face lit with an excitement he hadn't seen in years. She was wearing a new silk blouse, probably a $150 piece from Nordstrom, and her energy filled their cramped living room. "Close your eyes," she said, her voice giddy. He obeyed, trusting her completely. He heard the rustle of paper, the soft click of a briefcase latch. "Okay, open them." On their scuffed $200 coffee table sat a cashier's check. The numbers seemed to float off the page, unreal and shimmering. $94,000. Bryson's breath caught in his chest. He looked at Tamia, then back at the check, unable to process the amount. It was more money than he made in a year and a half. "Where did this come from?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. "It's from your father," Tamia said, beaming. "It's a gift, baby, a blessing. He wants to see us get ahead. He knows how hard you work, how much we deserve a little breathing room." Bryson sank onto the couch, his work boots suddenly feeling impossibly heavy. His father? Robert Jenkins was a man who reused tea bags, and kept a meticulous budget in a $5 notebook. A gift of this magnitude seemed utterly out of character. But Dad never said anything. This is too much. That's just him, Tamia said smoothly, her story already polished. He's so humble. He didn't want a big fuss. He pulled me aside last week after church and said he'd been saving for years just for this, for you. He said he trusted me to do the right thing with it, to invest in our future. He made me promise not to make a big deal out of it. The explanation washed over Bryson, soothing his disbelief with the warm logic of love. Of course his father would do it this way, quietly, humbly, through Tamia, whom he adored. Tears welled in Bryson's eyes, tears of profound, soul-shaking gratitude. He pulled Tamia into his arms, burying his face in her hair. I can't believe it. I need to call him. I need to thank him. Let's wait a day or two, Tamia suggested, her voice soft and reasonable. Let him have his moment. You know how he gets embarrassed by thanks. We'll have him over for a nice dinner this weekend. We'll show him our appreciation then. It all made perfect sense. The investment happened quickly. Tamia's brother, Marcus, had a brilliant business idea. He wanted to open a high-end auto body shop in San Marco, catering to luxury vehicles. All he needed was seed money. It's a family investment, B, Tamia had explained, her eyes shining with ambition. Marcus is smart. We'll be part owners. This is our ticket out of this duplex. This is the legacy your father wanted for us. Bryson, still dizzy with gratitude, agreed wholeheartedly. It felt like the perfect way to honor his father's generosity by building something. He watched as the money was spent, the figures quoted with a casual grandeur that was intoxicating. A state-of-the-art Garmat paint booth for $20,000. A Caroliner frame machine, the best in the business, for $35,000. An arsenal of snap-on tool chests and diagnostic equipment that cost another $15,000. The shop, named Prestige Autocraft, was born from his father's life savings, and Bryson felt a deep, swelling pride. They were finally building something. He just didn't realize it was all built on a lie. The cracks in the facade began to appear slowly, then all at once. The first sign was subtle, a shift in the temperature of their marriage. With the investment secured and Marcus's shop taking off, Tamia's ambition, once a shared dream, became a private kingdom. The first test came 3 months after the check cleared. A brutal summer storm had ripped through Jacksonville, and a branch had punched a hole in the roof of his father's house on Archer Road. Bryson, visiting on a Saturday, saw the telltale brown stains spreading across the ceiling of the guest bedroom. I need to get that fixed for him, Bryson told Tamia that night, gesturing toward the ceiling of their own duplex as if the stain were there. I'll get a quote. We can use a little of the gift money. It's the least we can do. Tamia, who was scrolling through listings for Riverside condos on her laptop, didn't even look up. She let out a short, dismissive laugh. Bryson, be serious. That money is for our future, for the business. It's not for patching up that old shack. The word shack landed like a slap. It was the house Bryson grew up in, the house his father had worked for 30 years at the naval shipyard to pay off. It's not a shack, Tamia. It's Dad's home. And he's fine in it, she said, her tone sharp, final. He wouldn't want us to waste thousands of dollars on a roof when that same money is generating real returns. It's about being smart, not sentimental. She closed the laptop with a decisive snap. The conversation was over. Bryson paid for a temporary patch himself, a $450 expense that tightened their budget for a month, while $94,000 of his father's money was busy building someone else's dream. The outrage began as a low, quiet hum in his chest. Soon, the financial segregation became overt. It started with separate bank accounts, which Tamia insisted was cleaner for the business. Then came the spending. Her wardrobe transformed. She'd come home with shopping bags from Street Johnstown Center, revealing a $2,400 Burberry dress she needed for a networking event for Marcus's shop. "It's all about image, honey," she'd say, twirling in front of the mirror. "We have to look successful for Marcus's high-end clients." Meanwhile, Bryson was still wearing the same $89 Timex watch he'd had for 5 years and buying his work jeans from Walmart. The white BMW 3 Series was the true turning point. She came home with it one day. The temporary tag still taped to the rear window. The lease payment was $650 a month. "It's the shop's car, technically," she announced, dangling the keys. "It's a business expense." Yet it was her name on the lease, and it was she who drove it everywhere, leaving Bryson to take the aging Camry to his own job, a rolling symbol of the widening gulf between them. The contrast was no longer just a feeling. It was parked in their driveway every single night. An $8,700 Armani suit for Marcus to wear to an awards dinner sat in their closet next to Bryson's grease-stained work coveralls. The public humiliations were the worst. They were at a family barbecue at Tamia's aunt's house. Marcus, holding court by the grill, was flush with success. He was louder now, more confident, his laughter booming across the manicured lawn. He clapped Bryson on the shoulder, his grip a little too tight. "You know, B, it's amazing what you can do with a little vision," Marcus said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Some people are just content to turn a wrench their whole lives, you know? No ambition." He winked, as if sharing an inside joke. "But me and Tamia, we see the bigger picture." Tamia, standing beside him, laughed. It was a high, tinkling sound that grated on Bryson's nerves. She didn't defend him. She didn't correct her brother. She just basked in the reflected glory of their vision. In that moment, Bryson felt invisible. He was the silent, unacknowledged foundation upon which their success was built, and they were dancing on his back, complaining about the view. The final, most cruel betrayal happened when his father's health began to fail. Robert was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, a swift and merciless disease. During one of Bryson's visits to the hospital, he sat by his father's bed, holding his frail hand. The smell of antiseptic was overwhelming. Desperate to connect, to show his gratitude one last time, Bryson brought up the gift. "Dad," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion, I never properly thanked you for what you did for us, for that money. It changed everything." Robert, gaunt and weary, turned his head on the pillow. A flicker of confusion crossed his face. "Money? Gift?" he rasped, his voice a dry whisper. "Son, I just want you to be happy. That's all I ever wanted." Before Bryson could press, Tamia, who had been standing in the doorway, swept into the room. She placed a cool hand on Bryson's shoulder. "See, honey, he's tired. Let's not bother him with the details," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. She leaned over and kissed Robert's forehead. "Don't you worry about a thing, Dad. Your money is in good hands. We're building a legacy for Bryson, just like you wanted." She was using his dying father as a shield for her lie. She was twisting Robert's love for him into a weapon against them both. Bryson looked at his father's confused, trusting face, then at his wife's serene, calculated mask. The low hum of outrage in his chest became a roar. But he said nothing. He just squeezed his father's hand, a silent promise to a man who could no longer hear him. They had no idea what was coming. 1 week after the funeral, on the evening of Tuesday, October 17th, Bryson found himself back in his father's house. The air was still and heavy. Grief was a physical presence, a weight on his shoulders. He was in his father's bedroom, a small, meticulously neat space methodically sorting through a life packed into boxes. He was supposed to be deciding what to keep, what to donate, what to throw away, but every object felt sacred. Every worn-out paperback, every framed photo, every tie hanging in the closet was a piece of the man he'd lost. At 8:14 p.m., under the cold, white light of a single fluorescent bulb, he picked up his father's wallet. It was a simple brown leather bifold, a $30 fossil wallet he'd given Robert for Christmas a decade ago. The leather was soft and worn smooth with age, curved from years of being carried in a back pocket. It smelled faintly of his father, that unique combination of Old Spice, pipe tobacco, and integrity. Bryson's thumb traced the frayed stitching. He opened it, expecting to find the usual contents: a driver's license, a few dollars in cash, maybe a fishing license. There was the photo of his mother, gone 15 years now, tucked into the plastic sleeve, faded and creased, and behind it something else, a small, tri-folded piece of paper. It wasn't a receipt from the grocery store or a business card. The paper was thick, heavy like stationery. It felt important. His fingers, usually so steady when calibrating a paint sprayer or welding a seam, trembled slightly as he unfolded it. The crinkle of the old paper was the loudest sound in the silent house. He smoothed it out on his father's dark wood dresser. At the top, in stark, official letters, were the words, "Promissory note and receipt of funds." His heart hammered against his ribs. He read on, his eyes scanning the typewritten lines. Date, September 8th, 2018, 5 years ago. To the month. Lender, Robert M. Jenkins. Borrower, Tamia L. Jenkins. Amount, $94,000 and 0 hundredths. $94,000. Purpose of loan, personal investment. Repayment terms, interest to accrue at a rate of 4.5% annually. Principal and accrued interest due in full upon demand by lender or upon the lender's death, payable to the lender's estate. Bryson's breath hitched. His world tilted on its axis. Below the terms, there were signatures. Tamia's looping, confident script was unmistakable. Below it was his father's signature, shaky but firm and determined. And below that, in a section marked "Witnessed by," were 2 more signatures. The first he recognized instantly, Reverend David Evans, the pastor of his father's church for 20 years. The second belonged to a Cynthia Bell, followed by the embossed, circular imprint of a notary public seal. The blue ink of the stamp was slightly faded but perfectly legible. A gift, a blessing. He was old school. No paperwork, just a handshake. The lies, once so comforting, now curdled in his stomach like poison. This wasn't a gift. It was a meticulously documented, witnessed, and notarized loan, a debt, a secret pact between his wife and his father, a secret his father had carried in his wallet, pressed against him every single day for 5 years. Why? Why wouldn't his father have told him? And then a cold, terrible clarity washed over him. His father had tried to tell him, in his own quiet way, by not trusting her, by protecting the money. By creating this document, he was protecting Bryson. He was ensuring that one day the truth would come out. His father, a man of few words, had left behind one final, devastatingly eloquent statement. The thought that had been planted in his mind by Tamia and Marcus echoed with chilling irony. He'll never check the old man's wallet. But he had, and in his hands he held 5 years of lies, and the key to his own liberation. A strange and unfamiliar calm settled over Bryson. The roaring fire of rage he expected to feel was gone, replaced by an icy, diamond-hard resolve. This wasn't a matter for shouting matches or tearful confrontations. This was a matter for precision, for strategy. He carefully folded the promissory note along its original creases, slid it back into its hiding place behind his mother's photograph, and placed the wallet in the inner pocket of his jacket. He turned off the light in his father's bedroom, walked out of the house, and locked the door behind him. The entire drive back to the duplex he shared with Tamia, he felt nothing at all. He was a machine, being calibrated for a single, specific task. The next evening, he went through the motions of their life together. He cooked dinner, sausage and peppers, one of Tamia's favorites. She sat at the kitchen island, scrolling through photos on her phone, narrating her day. She was finalizing the plans for a trip to Miami with her girlfriends, a $3,000 weekend getaway. Bryson just nodded and stirred the sauce. As they ate in near silence, he decided to test the lie one more time. "You know," he began, his voice casual, "I was over at Dad's place again today, going through his papers. It's funny, for a man who kept every receipt from the hardware store, I couldn't find a single piece of paper about that gift he gave us." He took a bite of sausage, watching her face. Tamia laughed, a dismissive little puff of air. She didn't even look up from her phone. "Oh, honey, I told you. Your dad was old school. He didn't believe in all that legal nonsense between family. He said his word, and a handshake were enough. He trusted me to do the right thing with it for us." She finally looked at him, her eyes wide and sincere. A perfect performance. "And I didn't I? Look at what we built." "Yeah," Bryson said, his voice flat. "You did." The ease with which she lied was the most terrifying thing of all. She had no conscience, no remorse. There was nothing left inside her to appeal to. That Saturday, he drove to San Marco to visit Prestige Autocraft. The showroom was immaculate, with polished concrete floors and minimalist furniture that probably cost more than his own couch. Marcus was in his glass-walled office, leaning back in a $1,500 Herman Miller chair, looking every bit the successful entrepreneur. He greeted Bryson with a hearty slap on the back. "Brother-in-law." "What brings you to my palace of vehicular perfection?" Marcus boomed. "Just in the neighborhood, wanted to see how things were going," Bryson said, feigning admiration. "This place is really something else, man. You really built something here." Marcus's chest puffed out. Pride radiated from him like heat. "Yeah, man. It took a lot of hustle, a lot of vision, and of course, Tamia's sharp eye for investment." Bryson walked over to the massive Caroliner frame machine that dominated the main bay. He ran a hand over its cool painted steel. "This beast must have set you back a fortune." Marcus grinned, leaning against the machine as if it were a sports car. He lowered his voice conspiratorially. "Let's just say $94,000 of seed money doesn't hurt," he said with a wink. He thought he was sharing a triumphant secret, a detail that bound them together in success. Tamia was brilliant. She convinced your dad it was the best investment he could ever make, better than some dusty old stock portfolio. The confession was so casual, so arrogant, it left Bryson breathless. They hadn't just taken the money, they were proud of it. They'd reframed the theft as a stroke of genius. "Yeah," Bryson said, forcing a smile. "My dad was a smart man." He looked Marcus directly in the eye, letting the words hang in the air. "Smarter than anyone knew." Marcus just laughed, completely oblivious. He had no idea he was standing in the middle of a crime scene, bragging to the victim. On Monday morning, Bryson took a personal day from work. Instead of heading to the garage, he drove downtown. The glass towers of the city reflected a clear, merciless sky. He had an 11 a.m. appointment with a probate lawyer he'd found online. Her name was Anya Sharma, and her reviews spoke of a sharp mind and a no-nonsense attitude. Her office was on the 14th floor, a quiet, professional space that smelled of paper and ambition. Anya, a striking black woman with her hair in elegant twists and wearing a crisp dark blue suit, greeted him with a firm handshake. Her fee was a steep $450 per hour, but Bryson knew this was an investment he had to make. He sat across from her at a large mahogany desk and told her the entire story, from the gift 5 years ago to the conversation with Marcus on Saturday. His voice was steady, devoid of emotion. He was simply reporting the facts. When he finished, he reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out his father's wallet, and retrieved the folded promissory note. He slid it across the polished surface of the desk. Anya picked it up and unfolded it with the care of an archivist. She read it once, then a second time, her eyes lingering on the notary seal and the witness signatures. She held it up to the light. Finally, she laid it back on the desk and looked at Bryson, a flicker of something, respect perhaps, in her eyes. "Mr. Jenkins," she said, her voice clear and direct, "this is not a misunderstanding. This is an ironclad personal loan agreement. It is a legally binding contract. The notarization and the witness, especially a man of the cloth, make it virtually unassailable in court. This $94,000 is a debt owed to your father's estate." A wave of relief, so profound it almost made him dizzy, washed over Bryson. It was real. He wasn't crazy. "What can we do?" he asked. "We file a claim against your wife in probate court for the full amount, plus 5 years of accrued interest," Anya explained, already sketching notes on a legal pad. "Given your testimony about your brother-in-law's admission, and with a little forensic accounting, we can demonstrate that the loan funds were directly funneled into his business. That gives us grounds to place a lien on all business assets of Prestige Autocraft. We can seize them and liquidate them to satisfy the debt." The plan was swift, clean, and devastating. "How much will this cost?" Bryson asked, the practicalities of his own finances a constant concern. "My retainer is $5,000, she said. "Total fees could reach $15,000, perhaps more if they fight it tooth and nail. But we can petition the court to have all legal fees paid from the estate's recovery. You wouldn't have to pay anything out of your own pocket." Over the next 2 weeks, Bryson and Anya worked in quiet, methodical synchrony. Anya's office subpoenaed the records. The paper trail was exactly as Bryson suspected, a $94,000 withdrawal from his father's savings account. A corresponding deposit made the very next day into a new checking account opened by Tamia, in her name only. A series of transfers over the following month totaling $94,000 from her account to the new business account for Prestige Autocraft. It was a perfect, unbroken chain of evidence. The final piece was a sworn affidavit from Pastor Evans. Bryson met him at the church, a small, welcoming building where his father had been a deacon for 30 years. The pastor, a kind man with silvering hair, remembered the day of the signing vividly. "Your father called me into his study with that nice young woman, the notary," Pastor Evans recalled, his voice gentle. "He seemed troubled, Bryson. He told me he was loaning the money to Tamia, but he didn't feel right about it. He said, 'I love my son more than anything, David, but I don't trust her. This piece of paper is for him. One day, he might need it to know the truth.' He made me promise I'd remember that day if I was ever asked. I am so sorry, son. I never knew what to do." Bryson felt a lump form in his throat. It wasn't just a legal document. It was a message, a final act of a father's protective love, sent across time. He now had everything he needed. The trap was set. All that was left was to spring it. The day of the probate court hearing was overcast, the Jacksonville sky a flat, oppressive gray. The courtroom itself was a small, sterile chamber on the 3rd floor of the Duval County Courthouse, smelling of old paper and stale coffee. It felt anticlimactic, too mundane a setting for the detonation that was about to occur. Bryson sat beside Anya Sharma at one of the smooth, worn wooden tables. He wore his best suit, a simple charcoal gray one he'd bought for $300 at Dillard's for his wedding. Across the room, Tamia and Marcus sat with their lawyer, a slick-looking man with too much gel in his hair. Tamia looked annoyed, inconvenienced. She shot Bryson a look of pure irritation, as if he were a child throwing a tantrum. Marcus was fidgeting, constantly checking his phone. They whispered to their lawyer, occasionally laughing softly. They believed this was a joke, a baseless claim from a grieving son who was confused and lashing out. They had no idea they were minutes away from their own execution. The judge, a stern-faced black woman named Judge Althea Morrison, entered, and the room fell silent. She had a reputation for being sharp, fair, and having no patience for theatrics. She reviewed the file in front of her, her expression unreadable. Tamia's lawyer went first. He stood and delivered a condescending speech about the nature of family generosity. "Your Honor," he began, his voice smooth as oil, "this is a simple, tragic case of a grieving son misinterpreting a loving gift from his father. Robert Jenkins was a generous man. He adored his daughter-in-law and wanted to help his family succeed. This so-called promissory note is clearly the product of an aging man's confusion, a document he likely forgot he even created." He painted a picture of Bryson as ungrateful and vindictive. Bryson just sat there, his hands resting calmly on the table. He looked at Tamia. She was nodding along with her lawyer's words, a small, sad smile on her face for the judge's benefit. Then it was Anya's turn. She stood, a portrait of calm, professional competence. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't use inflammatory language. She simply presented the facts. "Your Honor," she said, her voice cutting through the stuffy air, "the evidence will show this was not a gift. It was a meticulously documented loan." She placed a file on the judge's bench. Exhibit A, the original notarized promissory note, dated September 8, 2018, signed by both parties and 2 witnesses, she continued, her pacing deliberate. Exhibit B, bank statements from the deceased's account showing a withdrawal of $94,000 on September 9, 2018. Exhibit C, bank statements from a newly opened account in Ms. Jenkins' name showing a deposit of $94,000 on September 10, 2018. And Exhibit D, a series of transfers from Ms. Jenkins' account to the business account for Prestige Autocraft, totaling $94,000. With each exhibit, Tamia's confident smirk faltered. Marcus stopped fidgeting with his phone. Their lawyer's face tightened. "Finally, Your Honor," Anya said, holding up one last document. Exhibit E, a sworn affidavit from Pastor David Evans, who was present at the signing. She turned slightly to face Tamia. In his statement, Pastor Evans recalls Robert Jenkins saying, and I quote, "I love my son more than anything, but I don't trust her. This piece of paper is for him." Anya paused, letting the words settle in the silent room. Then she delivered the final blow, the callback that would shatter the last of Tamia's composure. "Furthermore, as recently as last week, when my client asked Ms. Jenkins about any paperwork related to this gift, Ms. Jenkins told him, and I am quoting my client's sworn testimony now, 'Your dad was old school, no paperwork, just a handshake and a blessing.'" Tamia's face went completely white. It was the color of bleached bone. All the performance, all the feigned confidence drained away, leaving a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. She whipped her head around to look at Bryson. Her eyes were wide with a mixture of shock, fury, and betrayal. She had been so certain of his ignorance, so confident in her deception. Bryson met her gaze. He didn't glare. He didn't smile. He felt nothing but the profound, heavy peace of a promise kept. His father's promise. Judge Morrison looked from the documents to Tamia, her eyes cold as steel. She didn't need long to deliberate. "The evidence presented is overwhelming and unambiguous," the judge declared, her voice ringing with authority. "This court finds that the $94,000 was a loan, not a gift. The promissory note is a valid and enforceable contract. Therefore, the sum of $94,000 plus accrued interest at the specified rate of 4.5% for 5 years is a debt owed to the estate of Robert Jenkins." She did a quick calculation. The total judgment against Ms. Tamia Jenkins is $118,341.50. Marcus shot to his feet. "You can't do that. She doesn't have that kind of money." Judge Morrison's gaze shifted to him, and it was withering. "Then it is fortunate that counsel for the estate has demonstrated a clear financial trail," she said. "As the funds were used exclusively for the capitalization of Prestige Autocraft, a lien is hereby placed on all business assets. The assets will be seized by the county and liquidated to satisfy the debt to the estate. We are adjourned." She banged the gavel. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. "No!" Marcus screamed, his face contorted in disbelief. "That's my business, my life." "It was a business built with stolen money, mister," a bailiff said, stepping toward him. "It is no longer your business." Tamia just sat there, frozen, staring at Bryson. The lie was dead. The facade had crumbled to dust, and in its place was a debt that would follow her for the rest of her life. The quiet old man's wallet had done its work. The consequences cascaded with brutal, systematic efficiency. The court's judgment was not a suggestion. It was a force of nature. Within 48 hours, the life Tamia and Marcus had built with Robert Jenkins' money was systematically dismantled. For Marcus, the end came on a Thursday morning. A team of county sheriffs and representatives from a court-appointed liquidation company arrived at Prestige Autocraft. They carried clipboards and rolls of bright yellow asset tags. Marcus tried to block the door, screaming about his rights, about injustice. But he was politely and firmly moved aside. Bryson heard about it from one of his old colleagues who worked nearby. The man described how they went through the shop like a disciplined army, tagging every single item of value. The $35,000 Caroliner frame machine, Marcus's pride and joy, got the first tag. Then the $20,000 Garmat paint booth. The Snap-on tool chests, filled with over $15,000 worth of specialty tools, were sealed shut with evidence tape. The computers, the office furniture, even the Keurig machine in the break room, everything was cataloged for auction. The locks were changed, and a notice of seizure was plastered on the glass front door. Prestige Autocraft, the symbol of Marcus's vision, was shuttered. He was left with nothing but a personal guarantee on a 5-year commercial lease for a building he could no longer use. Within a month, he filed for personal bankruptcy, his reputation in the Jacksonville auto community utterly destroyed. He went from a celebrated entrepreneur to a cautionary tale overnight. For Tamia, the downfall was quieter, but just as complete. The $118,341.50 judgment was a financial anchor that would drag her down for years. She filed for divorce immediately, a desperate attempt to sever herself from the consequences, but the debt was hers alone. It was attached to her name, her Social Security number. Since she had no significant assets, the $43,000 BMW was leased and was promptly repossessed. The court granted the estate the right to garnish her wages. 25% of every paycheck she earned was now automatically diverted to the estate of the man she had swindled. Her comfortable life evaporated. She could no longer afford the $1,400 a month rent on their duplex. And Bryson, in the midst of their divorce proceedings, had no obligation to her. She moved into a cramped, $900 a month apartment in a rundown complex off Arlington Expressway. The friends she had cultivated, The ones who admired her Burberry dresses and her brother's success vanished. She was a pariah. She had to take a second job waiting tables at a chain restaurant on weekends just to afford groceries. Her attempts to contact Bryson were a pathetic, escalating series of voicemails. First came the rage. "How could you do this to me, Bryson? To your own family? You destroyed us over some stupid piece of paper." Then, denial and bargaining. "This is all a misunderstanding. We can fix this. Please, just talk to me. I can pay you back. Somehow. We can work out a plan." Then, pleading. "Bryson, please. I have nothing. You can't just leave me with nothing. I'm sorry, okay? I'm so sorry." Bryson never answered. He deleted each message without a reply. Her apology was 5 years too late and $100,000 too short. It wasn't for him, it was for herself. Finally, the messages stopped. There was only silence. For Bryson, the consequence was freedom. The divorce was finalized quickly and cleanly. After all the assets from the shop were liquidated and Anya Sharma's legal fees were paid, the net recovery for his father's estate was $95,720. The money was deposited into the estate's account, a quiet testament to a father's foresight. The noise and chaos of Tamia's life faded into the distance. All that was left was the quiet and the chance to build something real. 2 years later, the scent of fresh paint and new beginnings hung in the air. Bryson stood in the main bay of a modest 2-bay garage on a quiet street not far from his father's neighborhood. The concrete floor was clean, the tool chests were neatly organized, and sunlight streamed through the large open doors. Above those doors, a simple, elegant sign read, "Robert's Restoration and Repair." He had done exactly what he promised himself he would. The first thing he did with the money from the estate was restore his father's house on Archer Road. He hired a contractor to put on a new $12,000 roof. He had the interior repainted, the hardwood floors refinished, and the kitchen updated with simple, sturdy appliances. He spent weeks in the yard, pulling weeds, planting a small garden of tomatoes and peppers, just like his father used to have. He moved in a month after the divorce was final. The house was no longer a place of stale grief. It was his home, filled with the warm, living memory of his father's love. Living there, he felt a peace that had eluded him for years. With the remaining capital and a small business loan from a local credit union, he bought the garage. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't in a trendy neighborhood like San Marco. But it was his. He built his business on the principles his father had taught him: honesty, quality work, and fair prices. He specialized in restorations of older cars, the kind of detailed, patient work he loved, but he also fixed dents and dings for the people in the neighborhood. His customers were teachers, nurses, and shipyard workers, people like his dad. People who needed their car to work and couldn't afford to be cheated. His reputation grew slowly by word of mouth. He was the honest mechanic, the one who would show you the old part he'd replaced, the one who would charge for 2 hours of labor because that's how long it took, not the 4 hours the book quoted. He wasn't getting rich, but he was making a comfortable living, enough to pay his mortgage and invest back into the business. He was happy. One afternoon, while cleaning out the last of his father's things from the attic, he found a dusty cardboard box. Inside was a collection of his childhood drawings. He pulled one out. It was a crayon drawing he'd made when he was about 7. It depicted 2 stick figures, one large and one small, standing next to a red car with the hood up. The larger figure, his dad, was pointing at the engine. The smaller figure, himself, was holding a wrench that was almost as big as he was. At the top, in shaky, childish letters, he had written, "Me and Dad fixin' cars." He had used a brown crayon for both of their faces and arms, a small detail of a child seeing himself in his hero. A deep, resonant love, rendered in wax. He took the drawing and had it professionally framed. It now hangs in his small office at the shop, right next to his business license. It is a constant reminder of where he came from and why he was doing this. True wealth, he now understood, had nothing to do with a $43,000 BMW or a riverside condo. It wasn't about the image of success. It was about the substance of character. It was the quiet dignity of a paid-off house, the profound satisfaction of a business built with your own two hands, and the peace that comes from a clean conscience. His father's final act, that folded piece of paper in a worn leather wallet, wasn't an act of revenge. It was an act of profound, patient love. It was a foundation, hidden away until the ground was clear to build something true and lasting upon it. A legacy not of money, but of integrity. Sometimes the quietest actions have the loudest impact. If you believe that a person's character is their true legacy, type "character is everything" in the comments below. And please remember to subscribe to Love Beyond Pride for more stories about the quiet victories that change lives forever.